I'm going to just kick us off, everyone.
Mhm.
Um, it's great to see everybody. I'll say to Rabbi Brous, this is a really extraordinary community. And the pieces of your book, just show up, be vulnerable, see the divinity in each other, hold grief and joy together, serve, have wonder. I mean, they're all parts of what we're trying to create in a deep, deep way. And so to read your book felt so both challenging in a good way, how else can we do it, and meaningful in a deep way in terms of what we're doing and who we strive to be. So I do want to ask for 1 second, everyone online, if you could just turn your cameras on so we could see your face. And at this point, I'll invite Sharon Rubin from our Adult Learning Committee to introduce Rabbi Brous.
Hello to everyone zooming in. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Rabbi Sharon Brous to speak with us today about her book, The Amen Effect, which so many of you have read and discussed in the discussion groups and book groups we've held over the last few months. Rabbi Brous is the senior rabbi and one of the founders of ICAR, a dynamic, activist, and spiritually moving Jewish congregation in Los Angeles. She is considered one of America's most influential rabbis, as well as one of America's most influential Jews. Rabbi Brous is involved with numerous Jewish organizations, including the Hartman Institute, Wexner Heritage, Reboot, Auburn Theological Seminary, New Israel Fund, and American Jewish World Service. She is an innovator who helped found the Jewish Emergent Network, which has received recognition for the impact of their work in the Jewish community on both a local and national scale. Somehow, amidst all of these activities, which is remarkable, Rabbi Brous found the time to release her first book, The Amen Effect, in January 2024, which became a national bestseller and which I know we've all enjoyed reading. After some initial thoughts by Rabbi Brous, we will open up to your questions. If you raise your hand in the Zoom link, which apparently is under React at the bottom of your screen probably, or if that doesn't work, you can actually raise your hand. Rabbi Ezra will call on you. Unless you are asking a question, and right now, please keep your Zoom on mute. You can also write a question in the chat, and Rabbi Ezra will read it to Rabbi Brous. So welcome, Rabbi Brous. We are truly delighted to have this time with you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you, Rabbi Ezra. And I was sitting in a Zoom room with myself thinking, oh, I guess nobody showed up to this party. So I'm really glad to see all of you here and glad we got that sorted out. Thank you for having me. I'm really touched by the invitation and honored to be with you today. I think the best way to start, I can give you a little bit of a background to what led me to want to do a deep dive into this topic and share a little bit about what I've learned in the last year year and a half now since it came out. And would love to just be in conversation with you, Rabbi Ezra, and with the community. I'll share for a couple of minutes. Some of you, I imagine, may have been to ICAR. And have any of you ever come for Shabbat? And I know we're not that far away. Okay, Batya and Miriam, you're all welcome anytime you're in Los Angeles. I came out from the East Coast and we started ICAR in the spring of 2004. And really what I was trying to do was build a community at the intersection of an effort to revitalize, reanimate ancient Jewish teachings and rituals and traditions for a generation that by and large had really moved away from organized religion. And expressed interest in spirituality and curiosity about God and about the soul and the afterlife, but really had an allergy to Jewish institutional life. That's what the Pew studies were showing us. That was just the reality in the pews. And I wanted to offer a kind of reanimation, investment in those traditions in a way that would speak to my generation. I was at the time 29 years old when we started the community. And also that would speak to a kind of urgent call to respond to the moral crises of our time. I wanted to reimagine what the prophetic voice might sound like in our time, and what would it mean for Jews in the pews to actually speak to some of the most difficult moral questions of our time. And we set out and built this community, and about 10 years in, I realized that there was a real problem that I was seeing pastorally among people who were coming in to the office to come in for one-on-one sessions with me. And Rabbi Esri, I'm curious if you've seen something similar in your rabbinic work, but people were coming in, and as much as I felt driven by this kind of fierce passion to reimagine Jewish life and to speak to the pressing moral issues of our time, people were talking to me about their broken hearts, and they were talking to me about loneliness. And a lot of people were saying things like, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone even notice? How long would it take for people to realize that I was gone? I mean, really painful personal stuff about their own lives, their own sense of worth, their lack of a sense of belonging in this world, knowing what their purpose was. Now, looking back, I can see why that happened about 10 years into the building of Ikar, 8 or 10 years in, because it was about 2012, 2014, where we now know that there was a worldwide epidemic of loneliness that started right around the time that billions of people across the world got smartphones and got on social media and started to ostensibly connect with hundreds or thousands of people and feel even more disconnected than ever from the people who they were closest to. And there was this massive worldwide breakdown in community, in belonging, in relationship. And I didn't know at the time that it was part of this vast trend. Now we only know it in retrospect now that about 10 years ago, this was happening, and not just in America, but all over. All I knew is that I was seeing a lot of pain in the community and a lot of sadness. And so I started researching about loneliness. And at the time, there wasn't a lot that I could get my hands on. Now it's much more known, especially because we had a wonderful Surgeon General who served for 2 administrations, who wrote and spoke a lot about loneliness, Dr. Vivek Murthy. And now people are much more familiar with these ideas. But at the time, I could get my hands on one really good book about loneliness, which was written by a professor and researcher named Dr. John Cacioppo. And he explained that loneliness was actually not only a spiritual problem, but was
I'll send you the
our
link.
bodies. And he talked about how acute loneliness is essentially the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That just knocked me off my feet. That there's real health impact and wellness impact on our bodies and on our spirits. And so I started to realize that it wasn't only a spiritual crisis, but it was a health crisis. And not only that, but I read Hannah Arendt when I was in graduate school, both at JTS, and also I did a graduate program at Columbia in human rights. And I went back and reread The Origins of Totalitarianism, which, if you haven't read it, or if you haven't read it lately, I strongly recommend that you read it again. She wrote it in the immediate aftermath of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, and she describes that at the heart of every totalitarian regime is a widespread sense of loneliness in the population. That totalitarian leaders, tyrannical leaders, need for the people to be alienated from each other. And so there is this sense of social alienation, of isolation, and of loneliness that has to permeate a society in order for these kind of strong men to come in and get some grasp on the society. She's writing this about Hitler. She was writing this in 1954, 56. And I realized this was in the mad rush to build Ikar as a community at the intersection of the revitalization of spiritual practice and social justice, building the beloved community, Dr. King's version of what the world could look like, of equality and justice and peace for everyone, that I had missed this central ingredient, which is that we had to start by building the beloved community internally, by actually taking care of each other. Now, I suspect this is something that's very important to your community, both because of what I've heard from your community and also what Rabbi Ezra said, even in this introduction. But I had never in my 10 years of building Ikar preached about how important it is that we show up at each other's Shiva. I never talked about how it was a moral and spiritual necessity that we go to the funeral, that we dance at each other's simchas, that we show up in moments of celebration and moments of sorrow for one another, and that is part of the work of transforming our society. That you can't build the beloved community out in the world if you don't build a beloved community internally, showing up for one another with love when it matters most. And I was searching for a way to put all of these pieces together, and I realized that there was this one sacred text. I'll just share this one last piece, and then we'll get into conversation. That I had encountered first many years earlier, maybe 15 years before, a Mishnah that I had read when I was in rabbinical school by accident. It wasn't what was assigned, but it was what I came across one day. And I didn't understand it at the time. And all of a sudden, I re-encountered this text now, about 10 years into building Ikar, and realized this is exactly what the rabbis were pointing us to. And that Mishnah, which describes this ancient temple ritual, became both the core, it became my moral and spiritual North Star, and it becomes the foundational paradigm for the book. And this kind of central image that I use in the book, which I hope we'll be able to talk about a little bit together today. For those who haven't read yet, but it seems like many of you have, so I'll just say very briefly, the ritual was that in ancient times, Jews would come from all across the land and some from the diaspora, especially on the holiest days. There would be masses of Jews that would make their way up to Jerusalem. They would climb the steps of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. They would enter through this beautiful arched entryway, and they would turn to the right and move en masse around the Temple Mount. And they would do a giant circle, and then they would leave right where they had entered, except for someone to whom something terrible had happened. Misha Ero Davar, in the language of the Mishnah. And that person would go up to Jerusalem and would go up the steps of the Temple Mount and go through the same entry, but they would turn to the left when everyone else was turning to the right. And this is where this sacred encounter would occur, in which the brokenhearted would be confronted by a whole community of people literally moving in the opposite direction. Someone would look into the eyes of that person and say, Malach, tell me what happened to your heart. And they would answer saying, I am bereaved, I am bereft, I am ill, I'm worried about my kid, I'm worried about my father, I found a lump, I'm scared. They would say whatever the pain was that they were holding in their heart, the thing that's hardest to say out loud, essentially to a stranger. And they would be met with a blessing. The person would say, may the one who dwells in this place hold you with love as you navigate this difficult time. And then each party would continue on their way. And I realized that in the midst of what was becoming an epidemic of loneliness, that what we needed more than anything was to be reminded from our ancient tradition that at exactly the moment that our strongest instinct is to turn away from each other, that instead we have to turn toward each other. That at precisely the moment that the people who are there on pilgrimage, who are having the time of their lives, this is the spiritual peak moment of their lives, the last thing they want to do is go check in on some stranger who's crying and who's not at all okay, right? They're with their family, they're with their friends, they're in this incredible movement of humans, but they have to stop and turn toward the stranger and say, hey, what's happened to your heart? Tell me, because I care. And they have to hear the answer, which might scare them, which might consume them with their own fear and vulnerability, which might repel them. They might be afraid that the pain is contagious. They have to bless them. And the person who's going this way, who the last thing in the world they want to do is even get out of bed that morning, they have to learn how to show up and go into this place and not turn to the right like everyone else, which might be their strong instinct, because like, I don't want people looking at me. They have to have people look into their face and say what happened. And they have to answer because they trust that they will be held by a community of love, that the people with whom they share their pain will not turn away from them, and then receive their blessing. And I thought, what a powerful model written 2,000 years ago for our time, when we've forgotten how to look at each other because we all have these things with us, everywhere we go. Like we know how to look at our phones, we don't know how to look at our friends. And what would it mean if we could retrain the brain and the heart so that when we see someone who's in pain, we actually turn toward them instead of away? Could we not respond to the epidemic of loneliness with love? And then what happens to our spirits? What happens to our bodies? What happens to our society when we actually know each other, when we know our neighbors, when we know our community, when we build a kind of strength of community so that we can't be torn apart? So that's the premise of the work. It's the premise of my rabbit. It's what do we need to do to build spaces, sacred spaces, not only in the sanctuary, but also in the book group, also in the library, also in the grocery store, where we can actually turn to each other in sorrow, in celebration, and in solidarity, offering our open hearts with compassion, with curiosity, and with care. So that's the basic idea, and I would love to be in conversation with you and hear how this landed, how this manifests in our time.
We'll start with a big amen. Thank you so much. You articulated that so thoughtfully. I have a bunch of questions, but I actually want to have everyone who's here be able to ask and really be in conversation. And I'm sure some of the things I have written down will come up. So raise a hand and I will call on you. So we'll start with Sharon.
So interestingly, you chose the one story that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and I've led, as the chair of the committee, several discussion groups about this. And the image of the ritual of the walking clockwise and counterclockwise has really been something I keep talking about. And every time I talk about it, we start thinking about it, and I know you've referenced the Hajj. So I'm thinking Temple Mount, tremendous courtyard, hundreds, thousands of people. So the discussion that we always come to is like, how are we picturing this? And I was picturing it as based on sort of the way you described it, each person, as you pass, is asking each person, what happened to you? May you be embraced, whatever. But other people are like, well, this is so impractical. Like the line would never move. Like thousands of people are asking thousands of people. And I was feeling like, well, this is not a time for someone to explain like a 10-minute version of what happened to me. This is like, I lost my mother. Maybe we'll talk more about it later. So I'm just wondering how you actually, in your mind, picture, is every person asking every person? How is this in your mind occurring?
Okay, thank you, Sharon, for that question. So this is a technical question, and I'm going to give you a rabbinic answer, which will get to your technical answer at the very end, but I'll tell you a few stories along the way. So first of all, I think this is a metaphor, and it is a metaphor that can also be a real practical ritual. And I'll tell you how I've implemented the ritual and what I believe that it actually looked like in ancient times, and maybe more importantly, what it could look like for us now. But I want to first delve into a little bit with you why this metaphor is why the paradigm is so powerful for us, because I believe that we have a tremendous internal resistance to doing what the rabbis are asking us to do here. And I'd like to ask you why you think that is. I'll tell you why I think it is. But why is it that there has to be a ritual designed to differentiate between the one who's not okay and the ones who are okay? Why do we need a ritual to tell us that when we see someone who's not okay, we have to go over and ask them? We cannot just walk by them. We have to approach them. And that gives us the language for approaching them. The language being a question, and a simple question, right? The formula, again, is malach in the language of the Mishnah. Malach, tell me what happened to you. Tell me about your heart. So why do we think that the rabbis need to do all of that? And I think that they're not just reporting on this is a ritual that used to happen. I think that they are prescribing this ritual to the people of our time, saying this is what it looks like to be in community. And the reason that they need to do that is because it is completely counterinstinctual. We would not do it otherwise. So now take yourself out of temple times and out of imagining some ancient ritual and just place yourself in this moment in which you are maybe at a wedding of a loved one and you're dancing and you're celebrating and you're having a moment of real joy, and you see someone who's sitting alone on the side who can't get into the joy. How counterinstinctual it is to stop, pause your own joy, and go over to them and ask them what's going on. And I'm asking this as a true question. You can write your answers in the chat or raise your hand, but what are the reasons why we don't show up for the people we know are in need? Think of the wedding. Think of the funeral that we don't go to, even though we know how important it is when people have shown up at our funerals for the people that we love. Why do we not show up? So just like, let's just take this one question for a moment. And Ilana, I don't know if if you have a separate question or if it's an answer to this one. Oh,
It's
you're
an
muted.
answer. I'm happy to share it or not.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think you touched on it. But it's this when there's a fear of like almost a contagion, right? You're like, I don't want to feel pain right now. I'm in a moment of joy. There's also the question of like, I don't know what to say, right?
Okay,
Which is
great.
beautiful because it prescribes it.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, those are the first two that come to mind.
Okay, thank you for saying that. And I think based on Harriet, it seems like this resonates. So a couple of things here. One is the contagion. The first is I'm just having a good time right now. Like, I'm a good person. I care about the people around me, but I'm having fun right now. And it's my family that's in this joyous celebration. Like, do I really have to take care of someone else right now? Can I just take care of my own spirit, right? And that's totally understandable. It's totally understandable. And I mean, I really get that. And yet, I think we all know what it feels like to be the person who's on the side when everyone else is in this moment of joy, and just to wish that someone would notice. Does anyone at this table, at this dinner party, notice that I'm not okay right now? I know you're all having a great time, but if one person stopped and said, like, hey, are you all right? I would say, yeah, I'm just having a moment where I'm really sad because something someone just said reminded me of my father and I'm still grieving, right? Like we just want someone to notice us. So I think you're right that we sometimes the contagion is, I don't want to take your sadness on. I'm in joy right now. There's another side to the contagion, which also is, I think we think divorce is contagious. I think we are afraid that if we get too close to someone else's broken marriage, we're going to have to consider our own marriages. And if they're really as strong as we think they are, I think we're afraid that someone else's grief is contagious, that if I get close to your vulnerability, I'll have to contend with the possibility of my own vulnerability. I think this is especially true and especially tragic when there's traumatic loss, especially loss of children. I think that many people are afraid if I get too close to somebody who has lost a child, God forbid, I will have to seriously contemplate what my life would look like if the worst thing happened to me. And I don't want to. I don't want to get there. So we avoid stepping out of that horror and going over to the person on the side because we don't want to deal with it. And we don't want to take that pain into our system. And then what happens is we end up isolating exactly the people who are in the most pain even more, which compounds their pain. Whereas on the other side, if we're able to go to them and actually open up a conversation, what we might find is that not the pain, that pain, like we can take some small piece of the pain from them, which we can talk about the 160th if you want to. I'd love to talk about the 160th after, but if we take even some small piece, we might be able to give them a little bit of comfort. We might be able to a little bit make them feel like they're not alone. Now, a big premise of this work is the recognition that we can't take each other's pain away, but we can stand in sacred accompaniment with someone as they walk through the valley of the shadow of death. we can make them know that they are not alone. Ki ata imadi, as the psalm says. I know that you're with me. Even though I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not be afraid because I know that you're right there. And what we can be for each other is the ones who say, I'm right here. Now, is there an impact on the heart of the person who's going this way? Of course, it changes your day. But I don't think that the impact is only a negative. And I'll tell you a little story. As I said, Sharon, this is going to be a long way to get to to answer your question. Um, there's a wonderful educator and friend on my staff at ECAR named Beth, and she's a potter. She spends a lot of time at the pottery studio. And she was one day sitting at the pottery studio, and I don't know if there are any potters on this call, but this is my happy place also. And what I've noticed about it is it's not a tremendously social environment. Like, people are really into their own art, and so you go to the studio, but people kind of keep to themselves. And Beth was in the studio, and she was actually listening to my book, the audio version of the book. And she was sitting across at her wheel, across from a man she had never seen at the studio before. And she's listening to the book, but she thinks, oh, the whole book is sort of saying, be in relationship, break the barrier between people. Human beings need human contact and human relationship. And this is how we fight totalitarianism. So I'm just going to go and do it. So she took her AirPods out and she started chatting with the guy across the way. And, what's your name? What do you do? And then she said, actually, my daughter just got married and we just had a big celebration. And she said, do you have any kids? And he said, I had 3 kids. One is 30 and one is 32. And then he quickly got up and walked away and to go clean his bowl, get more water. And Beth had this moment where she thought, okay, he just signaled something to me. I don't want to go there. That is a level of pain and vulnerability that I am not sure I can handle on this Sunday morning when I'm just trying to make bowls, but she thought, I feel like now I have to, because I'm literally in this dialogue with this teaching about how you have to show up. And so she got up and she walked over to the guy and she said, hey, I noticed that you said I had 3 kids and then you told me 2 of their ages. Did you lose a child? And he tears up and he said, yes, my daughter 2 years ago died by suicide at the age of 28. So so she said, what was your daughter's name? And they started to talk. And he said to her, the truth is, because of the horrible way that she died, nobody wants to talk about it. Not my friends, not my community, nobody. And Beth said, well, I want to talk about it. And they sat down and they talked for about an hour. And he showed her a picture of his daughter and him the morning that she died. They went on a big bike ride together. And he said, I've been sitting for 2 years with this big question of how could someone who was so alive in the morning feel like she needed to die by the end of the day? And he said, but I've been asking that question alone, because literally nobody wants to have that conversation. Nobody. And they hugged and he thanked her. And then Beth called me and she said, I know it made a difference for this guy. And she said, the thing I didn't expect was that it would also make a difference for me. I thought I went to the studio to make bowls that day, but I did not. I went to the studio to be in a conversation with a stranger about his kid. And I think about that story all the time because I know how hard it must have been for a mother also with kids around that age to be in that conversation, and yet how meaningful and moving it was. So I think there are lots of good reasons why we don't ask the question, why we don't follow the guy over to the sink where he's changing his water in the studio, why we don't go to the Shiva, why we don't show up at the funeral. We think there are going to be so many people there anyway. What's the difference? It won't matter. I'm not really that close with them. And as you suggested, one of the answers, one of the reasons we don't go is I don't know what to say, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, and I'm afraid I'm going to mess up, right? and make it even worse. And I have to tell you, as a rabbi, I felt that for years. I mean, I was sort of tortured by that question of like, we go right to the rawest moments and the hardest places. And what if I say something, God forbid, that makes it worse for a person who's already suffering? And yet, I think we all know from being on the other side, because I am guessing that most of us have had moments in our lives now where we've turned to the left, that actually what matters most is not what people are saying to us. It matters that they're there, right? And I do think there are things that we can say that can make it worse, and we should be careful with our words. But most important, it's just our presence. It's just being there so that somebody doesn't have to navigate that darkness alone. There's a midrash that I share somewhere in the book about Adam and Eve on the sixth day of creation, at the end of the sixth day, and the sun starts to set. They've only been alive for one day, but it's been an amazing day. They spent the whole day in the garden, and they named all the animals, and they fell in love, and and then the sun starts to set, and they've never seen darkness before, and they start to get really scared. And then and Adam is particularly terrified, and it gets darker and darker, and Adam starts to scream and wail and cry because he does what we do. First of all, he catastrophizes. He says, oh my God, the world is going to return to tohu vavohu. It's going to return to null and void, right? There'll never be light again. I mean, how many of us, when we've entered a period of darkness, whether it's illness or loss or a breakup, I mean, we think, I'll never love again. I will never live again. He does that too. And then he also blames himself. What did I do? What did I do wrong to make God hate us so much that God would do this? And he's out of control. And Eve walks over. The rabbis wrote this like really tender midrash 1600 years ago or something. And Eve comes over and just sits keneged lo, across from him, and just weeps with him throughout the night, just holds him and cries. It's so powerful. And she doesn't say, it's not your fault, because she doesn't know. And she doesn't say, of course there'll be light tomorrow, because she doesn't know. She just cries with him. And I think that that's our work. And that's what Beth did with this guy in the pottery studio. And that's what we have to do with each other. Just be there and weep with each other. Now, Sharon asks a super practical question, which is, how did they do that when there are hundreds of thousands of people moving around together? And the answer is that, I have no idea how this worked in real life. I've talked to a lot of historians trying to understand, what did this practice actually occur? Did it not? What did it look like? I'll tell you that we did do this ritual when the book came out at Ikar. We had about 750 people in Shul that night. Lots of people came. We did a big celebration for the book. And then I asked people if we could try the ritual. And I was in the time in Avela. I was grieving the death of my father. And I said, none of us are okay. This was, maybe 5 months after October 7th. The whole world's upside down, like grief, hostages, war. So I said, none of us are really okay, but if you have a little strength in you tonight, I want to invite you to stand up and go to this side of the room, and we're going to start to walk in this direction. And if you're like me and you're in a vela right now, if you are Misha Erodavar, someone to whom something had happened, if you're grieving, if you're sick, if you're caring for someone who's sick, come this way. And I think about 50 people went this way and about 700 people went this way. And it was incredibly powerful. And I think because I went this way, that's why the 50 people joined me. I think it's very hard to admit that you're going this way. And we stopped as we met and we engaged in conversation. Malach, people asked. And I said, Ani Avela, I am a mourner. I lost my father, and I'm so overjoyed about the book. And I'm so sad that my dad's not here to engage it with me and celebrate with me. And they blessed me. People blessed me, like strangers who came to Ikar for the first time, people who never blessed anyone before. Because think about this. They went to the Temple Mount not to be blessed by the priests, not to be blessed by Rabbi Ezra and Rabbi Brous, but to be blessed by each other. right? Because every one of us has the ability to bless each other, and people blessed. And it was kind of chaotic, Sharon. You're right in predicting the chaos there. And on one hand, we couldn't go more than a minute with each person because that context doesn't invite that. But I felt so cared for. As a mourner, I felt cared for in that space. Then I started to do versions of it in board meetings, in small intimate talks with people. I went to University of Michigan. As part of my book tour, I gave a talk in Ann Arbor in a shul, and I went to University of Michigan and I sat down with 12 student leaders who were struggling in different ways because the campus was super challenging. These are Jewish student leaders across the political spectrum who are really, really struggling in the aftermath of October 7th. And we sat in a room, just 12 of us, and I asked to each one, Malach, and they answered, telling me what was happening in their heart, and I blessed them. And then I asked someone else to take the baton and be the person who asked Malach and be the person who gave a blessing. And everybody in that room shared what was in their heart and also shared a blessing. And that was much more intimate. And we had much more time for each person. So you're right. You can't do a 50-minute therapy session with each person when you're in a circle like this, but we can create contexts in which that kind of deeper connection is possible. So it's a model. It's not, I don't think that it's intended to be the be all end all. It's a reminder that when you're scared to turn towards someone who you know is broken, or when you're scared to reveal your brokenness, that's exactly when it matters most that we actually do make that turn.
Thank you so much. And thank you for helping all of us think, because it's not just me think, but all of us think of how else can we do this in our community? Because there are so many ways. When you ask the question, why is this so hard? Linda Avital wrote, our culture sees pain as a failure. And then as you were kind of sharing the story of Beth, several people wrote how it just brought tears to their eyes. And Ilana wrote, she was the angel. Batya wrote, she was the bowl she had wanted to create and held his pain and his questions. So I appreciate everything that's been written in the chat. Brad Friedman wrote that 2 Jehovah Witnesses came to his door and they had read your book. So, that's so funny. And then Jackie Dines wrote something really kind of beautiful in terms of, I think, also answering the question, why is this so hard? We have a public face and a private face. And we often feel we need to keep our mask on. No one wants to feel vulnerable. So we've kind of looked at it from both angles and both sides. I know Alana had a question, and then Jackie had a question. Ilana, did we get to your question?
Alana or me?
You, Ilana.
Oh, I answered Rabbi Brous's question. So
you were answering Rabbi Brous's question. Okay, Jackie, did you want to add to what you said?
I think that Rabbi Brous has basically answered my question in the way you've spoken about the situation. And I think now with the kids growing up with the cell phone that is connected to their hip, I think the situation is getting worse. They have forgotten how to talk to each other in any other way than a 5-word text. And it's sad, because you wonder what's going to happen to this next generation that are petrified to admit they're having a hard time.
Yes.
And it's causing an epidemic of anxiety amongst this generation that's coming up.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I imagine some of you might have read The Anxious Generation, which I found to be incredibly helpful in connecting some of the dots that we're talking about here, and where Jonathan Chait he distinguishes between a play-based childhood where kids would go to the playground and talk to each other and get in fights with each other and then need to resolve them and take turns and learn how to share, versus a phone-based generation in which there's no thickness to the relationship, in which when you get angry at someone, you disappear them, or you publicly shame them, or you humiliate them. Like they're not learning the tools that we need in order to really build strong relationships and the strong elements of democracy and civil society. Um, and I will say it's not only the young people. I mean, I think it's the adults. And I remember years ago, I think it was 10 years ago, I read a study that said they asked kids what the thing was that they disliked most about their parents. And the kids said that they're always on their phones during meals, right? Like the kids said that about the parents, because also the parents are addicted. Like I mean, and in a way, it's like it's not our fault. They designed these devices to be addictive, and they are. And also, we have to boundary because we have to protect ourselves. And there was a study that came out just before COVID that said that 1 in 3 Americans do not know the names of our next door neighbors, that we're that alienated from each other. It said that 25% of Americans say that they have not one confidant in the world, not one person whom they really trust to share their heart with. That is dangerous for all of us. And that's not just the kids. And I do think it's worse for the kids in a way, because they're, as we say, digital natives. Like this is their whole reality. Um, and my son said to me yesterday, my youngest is 16, and we were spending we babysat my niece who's 5, and he said, wow, I didn't realize how hard it is to take care of a little kid. He said, like, she needs you all the time. You can never say like, okay, I'll see you in an hour, go play on your own. Like she can't shoot hoops on her own, like the little kids. And so he said, I kind of get why parents just hand the phone to the kid and say, I'll see you in an hour. I got to go do some work, which was interesting. It was like his teenage mind kind of understood. And I get why we do it. And also it's very, very dangerous for us. So Harriet, I see that you have, oh, sorry, Rabbi Ezra. I don't know if you wanted to.
No, all good.
Okay.
We'll hear from Harriet. Let me read you what Batya wrote in the chat, and you'll, I think, be able to build on it and maybe weave into Harriet's. Batya writes, many don't share because they have had too many experiences of others not holding space for them, responding with their own travails. So that lack of kind of reciprocity, that not feeling that it will be held with the trust with which it was given, I think is so real for people. And before we get to Harriet and Miriam, I will just share with you one of the pieces that really moved me and challenged me in your book was, how do you deal with all of those people who don't make space for you when you do it? You know, the lady who comes running into your office yelling about the nursery school, or the person who assails you because of their perception of your political point of view. And so that capacity to hold them in compassion and context, which I think you ask us to do, is really, really hard. That when it doesn't come back to you.
It's really hard. And I'll come to that in a moment. And Batya, it's such a sensitive question that you raise. And thank you for saying it. So there are a couple of dimensions here that I want to address. So I think one thing that you're hinting at, and tell me if I'm right here, but when you say that, I just want to get the words right, not holding space for them, responding with their own travails, meaning people come to us when we've experienced a loss or a struggle, and they share with us their own pain. Like, oh, I experienced, oh, this is just like when I was sick, or I also, had a loss like that. And I think what people are trying to, I don't know if you were indicating that or not, but that sometimes in an attempt to connect with someone who's struggling, we put our own pain at the center instead of listening. We talk more than we listen. And I don't know if this is exactly what you're pointing to, but it did remind me, I want to just share with you, this is very hard, and I'm sorry to share these painful stories today, but it's just what I'm thinking about. But we've had, one of the things that we've learned in the community through a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of tragedy, and every community has tragedy. And I realize as our community has grown over the years, we just love more people. And so we're going to be exposed to more pain because that's just the way that the world works. But we had one of the things that we've learned is that people really don't know what to say. And that not knowing does keep them away. And people fill the space in ways that are unhelpful. And so in a couple of times when there's been traumatic loss in the community, I've worked with the families at the suggestion of a bereaved mother from many years ago to write a note that goes on the door at the Shiva that says, "Thank you for being here. Here are a few things that will be helpful for me and as the bereaved, and here are a few things that will not be helpful. So please don't do this." And the reason I remember this right now, Batya, from your beautiful question, is that we recently had a terrible loss of a 15-year-old boy in our community. And the family was terrified that people were going to come in during the Shiva and say horrible things that would compound their pain. And so they literally wrote, "What do we want you to do? We want you to ask about our son. We want you to tell us stories about our son. We don't want you to ask us, how did he take his own life? What did
Oh,
he do?"
dear God.
Do you know how many people ask that question? Like they think they're being helpful, but that's not helpful. They're making the family relive the worst element of the worst tragedy of their lives, right? So they said, we want you to tell us about your kids. Don't pretend like you don't have kids. Don't be afraid to tell us about your kids, but please don't talk endlessly about your kid and how nervous they are about their PSATs, right? Like, I don't need to hear that. That's not helpful for me, but don't avoid talking about your children with us. And so what they essentially did, like, and please don't tell us about your cousin's husband who died by suicide. I don't want to know about that right now. Like they understood that instinctively people come in and they get nervous and they're like, "Oh, I can connect this. I can connect your cancer to my friend's brother's husband's cancer. And so I'm going to talk about that." But that's not helpful. What we actually want is for you to say, would you like to share about your own experience? How can I be helpful for you right now? I brought some raspberries and strawberries for you to eat, like tell me about your grief. Tell me about your loved one. And so I think people try to fill the space in ways that are sometimes profoundly unhelpful. And that kind of avoidance is something that we have to understand and be aware of. Now, what do we do when someone hasn't held space for us, but needs us to hold space for them? Like in the examples that I think you're alluding to, but also Rabbi Esri's explicitly asking. I believe that especially in hard times like what we're living through right now, we really have to think about who do we want to be in the world and be careful not to mirror the worst elements of what we're seeing in our society in ourselves. I think that's true on a broad, like national and social and political scale. And I think it's also just true on the smallest, most interpersonal, most intimate scale. So when somebody fails to show up for us, I think that we don't mirror that behavior by not showing up for them. I think that it calls forward our best selves. So, it's interesting. My mother, I mentioned that my father died. He died a year and a half ago, in between when I closed the manuscript and when the book came out. So my whole book tour, really, I was in mourning. And a few months ago, my mother's very dear friend also lost her husband. And she says to my mom every day, "I wish that I had known what it was like to lose a husband when you lost yours, because I would have been a better friend."
Oh,
She said, "I didn't know, and I'm sorry, because I had never experienced that kind of loss." And she said, "I didn't know how important it is to make sure that you have regular dinner dates on your schedule that you can count on. Tuesday night dinner with these friends, Thursday night dinner with these friends. Because I just didn't know. Now I know." And so I think someone else's failure to show up for us in the way that we need it doesn't mean that we should mirror that failure in order to prove the point. I think it means that we should be exactly who we are in the world in order to prove that point. Now, Rabbi Ezra, you're speaking about something even more complicated and harder to do. which I will just speak briefly about chapter 8, and then we'll go to, I know that Rana and Brian are waiting, and forgive me for giving a long rabbinic answer to a short question.
We'll catch up.
But in chapter 8 of the book, as many of you know, I share that in the Mishnah, most of the book, I'm talking about the brokenhearted who turns to the left, the person who's bereaved, bereft, ill, lonely. But in chapter 8, I reveal that the Mishnah itself actually talks about two kinds of people who turn to the left. One is the brokenhearted. I extrapolate from the mourner to be all of the brokenhearted. But the second is what's called the menudeh. And the menudeh is someone who's been ostracized from the community because their actions or their words have been so painful, so harmful to the community that they have to be ostracized from the community for the safety of the community, and in order to awaken them to the harm that they've caused in the hopes that they'll come back to community. When those people show up, it's one step short of excommunication. We don't have dinner with them. They don't come to book talks. They don't come to shul on Friday night. They are ostensibly removed from the community, except that they show up on those sacred days. They go up to Jerusalem. They go up to the Temple Mount. They turn to the left like the bereaved, and we see them. And I imagine some people in the community know that this person's walking this way because they're ostracized, because they've done something harmful. Whether we know it or not, we ask them the same question we ask the bereaved. We say, Malach, tell me what happened to you. Someone who's really hurt us. We greet them with the same open-hearted, vulnerable questioning that we greet a mourner in the community. And we say, tell me, what do you see from your perspective? Tell me about your heart. And they answer saying, listen, I'm walking this way because I've been ostracized from the community because I hurt people here. And we respond to them, not by cursing them out, not by saying, yeah, you're right, you hurt us. This is what you did, this, and this. And that's why you're not welcome here. We respond to them with a blessing. We say either, according to one rabbi, may this community open its heart to embrace you again, or may your heart turn so that you realize the pain that you've caused so that you can one day be embraced again. But we bless them. And I feel like what that's saying to us is it's not only about opening our hearts to the people who are grieving and who are struggling and who are suffering. It's also trying to find a way to stretch open our hearts to people who are walking in the opposite direction from us, maybe not coming toward us, but coming at us with ideas or views that we find reprehensible, alienating, painful, problematic, and greeting them with curiosity too. And so in the story that Rabbi Ezra is referring to in the book, I share about somebody who's attacking me, coming at me with like real cruelty that I don't deserve. This happens with some regularity, unfortunately. That's just the reality. And like learning how to exercise in my own heart the kind of curiosity that lets me say, what's going on for her, right? I wonder why that person is behaving in this aggressive way toward me. I wonder what she sees from her vantage point. What's her backstory? And then, and what happens when I'm able to open up that pathway? What can I learn about myself and about her that might change this entire dynamic? That's really hard to do, especially now where we feel so vulnerable to each other. It's really hard, but I think it's really essential to living in the times that we're in.
Thank you. It's true. Batya writes, in a way that I think really pulls together some of what you said. It takes not only great courage to reveal our vulnerability, but compassion for those who might not be able to hold
Yes.
it, and a willingness to be delightfully surprised. I mean, that really took what you said and hit it perfectly, and that, Ilana wrote, Ilana, it is almost more painful if someone responds to you in your most vulnerable time in an insensitive or painful way. It's very, very true. Our people on the screen know that our our ritual director is going through cancer treatment now, and it's going okay. But the trying to cue people to respond in a way that's just present and caring, and not to share your own medical advice and things like that. We're learning. We're learning well. Brad Friedman wrote, "You learn from experience to not take the risk." And in our American society, the person who has been shamed for violating etiquette is the one who's exposed others to their vulnerability. Good. Modern social norms promote such a twisted sense of what constitutes strength. So we're all building on each other. Alana wrote again, someone gives you advice or tells you in some way that you shouldn't feel the way you do, which is very, very true. Jackie writes, stay present with the person's pain, respect their grief. Gentle. Okay, good. We need a Western world commission on solving the problem of loneliness for future generations. That's where Dr. Murty's book is so very, very powerful. We really do need that. Let's take some of the questions. I know Harriet had her hand up, and then Miriam, and then Brana and Ryan. Why don't we take those three questions together and let you weave them together? So Harriet, let's hear your question.
Oh, I had a couple of thoughts. First of all, I wanted to thank Rabbi Brous for the conversation that you had with Ezra Klein after October 7th. I was able to send that around to a lot of friends, and it was very comforting to people. So thank you so much for that. And I would say that a lot of, going back to social media, a lot of times when people are in painful situations, they gaslight themselves. And then the media that they're putting out is also gaslighting. And I had the experience of that when I did when my marriage broke up. I posted something, and a friend of mine wrote me privately, from a longtime friend from high school, and she said, "Oh, I thought your life was so perfect." And I think that is also an issue with social media, in that we're putting out this image of ourselves as perfect, and we're so scared to reach out to each other because we're thinking, oh, my life isn't perfect. Why isn't my life perfect like hers? And I just wanted to throw that out there as another barrier in that.
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Miriam.
Okay, so I attended Maya's bat mitzvah at Ikar last month on Zoom, and I don't know her last name because I'm a friend of Ellen Solomon, and it's her granddaughter. And I was just amazed by your sermon. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
so my question, as soon as I thought of my question, I had a refutation of it. So I'll just throw both of them out there and see if it makes sense to you. So one solution I thought of is, what if all of us had stronger psychological boundaries so that we didn't feel guilty for whatever the ailment is of the other person. We didn't take it personally, so we could function better. Or we weren't so needy. We weren't bleeding all the time emotionally. We could, stronger boundaries. And as soon as I thought of that as a possible solution to what you're describing, then I thought, well, that makes us all like robots and we don't interact. So the question, I guess, is, would stronger boundaries be helpful?
And then let's take Brian and Rana.
Hi, that's a great segue, Miriam, for what was going to be. I just wanted to take things in a little bit of a different direction in terms of a question. Before we came to California 6 years ago, Rabbi Brous, Brian and I spent 5 years at Rumamu in New York City on the Upper West Side. And the congregation there had a lot of folks who were alone and lonely and struggling because of the demographics. And I taught a bunch of classes there, and I actually continue to teach there. And I think in part because of that role, and for other reasons, there were a lot of people who I ended up playing a role for in this way, but not just a one-time sitting down for an hour, but there was an ongoing dependence and reliance, which can be also challenging, especially if you have, your own families, things that you're dealing with in your own kids, and you're at a stage of life where you're juggling. I mean, it reminds me of the caregiver's dilemma too, in a certain way, but I thought this was a segue because Miriam mentioned boundaries, and how do you meet the challenge of keeping boundaries around your own psychological self and status while still sorry, being there on an ongoing, continuing basis for what can sometimes be a bunch of people who are in need and in very serious need.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for these questions. I'll try to address all of them. Yeah, Harriet, I so resonate to what you're saying about the gaslighting on social media. And, I'm so grateful for the technology in many ways. I mean, it's saved our lives during COVID, being able to connect with each other. And I do think that there are, in such a disconnected world, that there is a way to connect very meaningfully through the technology. I am increasingly convinced that social media, at the end of the day, will not be seen as a force for good. When historians look back at this, that we will see incredible pain, not just the anxiety that I think, was it Jackie who was speaking about this earlier? Anxiety, depression. There are a lot of very poor wellness outcomes that we see. But I think it has led to a kind of self-deception that's really dangerous too. And increasingly, my response is just let's shut off the social media. I mean, I felt I myself, after October 7th, I basically went cold turkey off the social media. I just couldn't bear it. There was a warning that came out for our kids that said, keep the kids off social media because Hamas was engaging in a psychological warfare by putting out these videos. I mean, that was what all the day schools put out this warning. And I said, it's not just for kids, it's for all of us. Like, I don't want to see that. I want to, here's how I thought of it. If one of these people who's posting this video requested a meeting with me, they wouldn't get one. And so why am I inviting them into my head and into my bedroom at midnight? Why are they getting that meeting when they wouldn't be able to get a meeting with me during the day? So basically, I started doing the New York Times puzzles at night instead, because I just needed to do something. Like, I felt this kind of addictive energy, like I need to do something, but I don't want to do that. Now, that's not only true for political propaganda, but it's also true for the way that we present ourselves. And Rabbi Ezra can, I'm sure you can affirm this too from your side. But, one thing you learn being in the pastoral seat is that people's lives are not what they appear to be to the public. And it's, often people who seem to the outside world like they have the most beautiful, most loving, most perfect relationships and lives and marriages, are really hurting inside. And so I feel it's, it's really important for us to encounter one another for who we really are. And I think it's increasingly unhelpful, all those shots of us so happy on vacation, both because of what it's presenting about us that might not be true, and also because of the way it's making other people feel who don't have what they think that we're saying we have. In general, I think that the gaslighting is very dangerous for our health. To Miriam and Rana and Brian's comment, and I'm going to take all of it to get really together, but about would it be helpful for us to create stronger boundaries and the caregiver's dilemma? I speak about this in one of the chapters of the book about this. I mentioned earlier the 160th, and I'll just say it very briefly because I know the hour is getting late here. But I do, as much as it is our obligation to show up for each other, there are people, I'm clearly, Rana, you're one of them. And I imagine, based on the real tenderness and sensitivity of some of the questions and comments that you're asking, that there are many here in this group who, either by nature or by profession or both, are always walking to the right. We're always keeping our eyes up and thinking, who here needs help? Who needs support? Who needs a comfort? You know, I see you in shul crying in the corner. I don't know you. I'm going to go over. I'm going to show up at Shiva. I'm going to bring lasagna. How do we not fill up with other people's pain and with other people's needs, which might be so great that we just can't, we can't, no matter how much we give, we can't make it okay, right? And how do we not end up taking that away from our own spiritual and mental health, from our own family lives? And I think that the first and most important thing that we can do is actually talk about it, the caregiver's dilemma. It's not something that we talk about. I've been a rabbi now for 24 years. I never sat in a circle with rabbis who said, I feel like I'm filling up with other people's pain. I mean, I went from the hardest funeral that I've had to do, and I've had to do some really awful ones. I went from burying 2 children with the soil in my own hands to the hospital because my sister-in-law gave birth during the funeral. And I held a newborn baby who was an hour old in my hands and noticed that the soil was in my fingernails. And I thought, okay, this is just the job. You know, like we don't talk about what kind of toll that takes on the soul and on the body. I never talked about that with anyone. You know, I just thought like, well, that's that's my job. I held a new 1 hour old baby with hands that had soil from the burial of 2 children. So I think we need to talk about it. And I think that we have to understand that there is a toll that this takes on us. And that my sister said this thing that I think about all the time now. If you don't metabolize the suffering, it will metastasize inside your system. And so we have all kinds of caregivers, teachers, doctors, clergy, frontline workers who are on the front lines in all different kinds of ways, psychologists, social workers who have caregiver burnout, who themselves become depressed, become anxious, become exhausted, turn against their family in ways that are cruel and unacceptable, leave the field, or worse, engage in self-harm. And so what we have to do is we actually have to talk about it. And when we talk about it, we realize that we also sometimes are walking to the left and that we need to receive the care and the love that comes from the right. And it's very hard for people who are oriented toward caring for others to receive that care ourselves, because Rana, I'm sure you're really good at helping those folks at Romemu and probably in your community here who need it, and they do need you, but also you need it. And so it's really hard to accept that, and yet we do. And so I want to really encourage us to speak honestly about what we've experienced. I now say to my rabbinic team, we start every meeting with what's something that you experienced this past week that you feel really proud of? What's something you feel you handled well? And what's something that's been really, really hard for you? Either you're still struggling with how do I do this the right way, or you feel like it was just painful and it's sitting on your heart, because we need to lift it up off the heart. And the last thing I'll say about this is during the last week of my father's life, he was on hospice. We had home hospice care. And we had the most wonderful team of hospice workers who came in and were working with him and with us. And one of them was a guy named Big Art, because he was giant and he called himself Big Art. And he was just this giant human in physical and spiritual form. And I said to him, Art, how do you do this? You only meet people in the very last days of their lives, and you are full of love. And I felt like he loved my father, like the gentleness, the tenderness, the care that he brought. It felt like love. How do you come in and love people knowing that they're about to die? And he said, every time I leave the house of somebody who I'm caring for, I go outside and I push out my breath, and that helps me in a way metabolize what I've just experienced, so that I can go home and be a good partner, so that I can go home and be a good parent, so that I can go to the next patient and also hold them with love. And I thought what he's doing with his breaths is exactly what we're talking about, right? When we talk about circling, he's actually saying, I want to be able to hold you with care. So I have to make sure that I don't fill up with pain so that I can continue to receive every person as an image of God, as they are. And I was the recipient of that love, and I'm so grateful for it. So I know I just saw that you said you wanted to do Kaddish
We'll
Rabbah
do it in
at
a
the
couple
end.
minutes, but I did want to share with you, as we're having that discussion of kind of some of the alienating pieces of our world, Michael Friedman wrote, we also live in a community that idolizes certain markers of success, not just on social media. So,
Yes.
we're fighting a lot of things. Michael Batat, had talked about how powerful the book was, and he's curious about the feedback you've gotten from people and the actions they're taking after reading it. And I will share with you one other piece. I felt so liberated reading about the physicians, the rabbis who need healing as well, because you're absolutely right. We don't talk about it. I feel like in some ways many years ago, a couple decades ago, when you were just starting out, I had a health crisis, and I've shared that with our community. And thank God I'm doing well in the care that came as a result of that. I will also say sometimes the inappropriate anxiety that came with some of that too was also real, but we needed to name it. And I've watched way too many of our colleagues have health issues, both mental and physical. And it's so real. And we need to sit with each other and it's just so important, and to name our truths. At our synagogue, the last couple of weeks, we've had some major changes that have caused lots of anxiety, as it should. And people need not only kind of reassurance and what are we going to do, but I've so appreciated those who have said to me, Rabbi and Nat, I know this must be hard for you as well. So that capacity for those of us in the position that you and I are in, to create openings to receive that support and to support one another when we're seen in certain ways, I wanted to give another big amen to.
First of all, thank God you're doing well, and wishing you continued refuah. And I love that your community was able to be a support for you. And I certainly experienced that myself, when I was going through the mourning period. And I'll just tell you, I was a terrible mourner, because so many people showed up for Shiva, and I kept running over to them saying, "Hey, how's your mother doing? How was your foot surgery? Is everything okay?" And finally, my husband and my dearest friend, who happens to be our CEO, Melissa Balban, said to me, "You are being a bad model right now of how to be a mourner. You need to sit down and let people come to you and let them take care of you." And I remember that week that one of the people who came was this wonderful guy who lived all the way in Malibu, and he drove with the traffic. It must have taken him 2 hours to get to my Shiva to bring a case of LaCroix. And I saw him and I'm like, we have LaCroix on this side of town. You do not need to come and fight traffic to get here. And he said, "You have no idea how meaningful it is for me to be able to do something for you." And I'm sure, Rabbi Ezra, that the same was true for your community, that it's really meaningful for us to be able to do something for each other. So thank you for saying that. I'll answer Michael's question about the takeaways, and just say that at the end of the book, I have these 8 spiritual practices. No, I don't just want people to think of this as like a really good sermon. I want people to think, how can this change the way I live? And so translate each chapter into one small thing that every single one of us can do. And I'm so glad he made me do that, because as a result, now I really try to do these things every single day. I'll give you 3 really quick examples, and maybe with that we'll close. So one of them is get to know your neighbors. a direct response to that study saying that we don't know each other. And I think couldn't be more critical than in this time. And so during COVID, I started going on a short run every single day. And I'm the annoying person who greets every single person on my run. And I say hello and I ask them their name if I don't know them. And it changed my relationship with my neighborhood. And now I really know all my neighbors. I really did not before because I'm at work all the time. And, you know, I wasn't a person who's like out chatting a lot in front of the house. And now I do. So that practice is like take a slow walk around the block once a day if you can, and just say hello to people and see how they're doing and check in on them. And I think that's really critically important. One of them is to take a joy break. This comes from my beloved friend Shifra, who realized in her grieving period for her partner, Michael, who died, that she didn't want to like put on widow's garment and sit in sackcloth and ashes for a year, that she fell in love with Michael because he was hilarious and he was the life of the party and he always made her laugh and he was full of joy. And so she set her phone for 18 minutes and forced herself to just experience joy, to like eat the whole chocolate cake, you know, to go for a walk in Central Park, to listen to music and dance alone in her apartment, something that would make her feel just alive. And she did that. And I started taking it on. I thought if she can do that during her year of mourning, I can do that in solidarity with her. And so now I do it too. If I haven't had 18 minutes of joy, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do something that I know will make me laugh right now, that will just fill my heart with a sense of joy and purpose. I really believe that joy is not a luxury, that joy is a spiritual necessity. And one more, which is chapter 1. It's just show up. Just show up at the funeral. Just show up at the simcha. It matters. Just show up when someone else's kid is becoming bar mitzvah and you're not really friends. Your presence there to celebrate with them, to sing Siman Tov and Mazel Tov, it actually matters. And we all know this because we know that when people have shown up for us, it's mattered. And so I think that the ability to say amen to someone else's Yitkadal v'yikadash Shemei Rabbah is one of the most powerful expressions of our humanity. And when we're the ones saying it, Yitkadal v'yikadash Shemei Rabbah, hearing others say amen matters and matters profoundly. So I think we're going to close with a Kaddish de Rabbanan, but I wonder, and maybe Rabbi Ezra, if you have a different way of closing, let me know, but I wonder if there is anyone in this group today who's grieving the death of a loved one or who's observing a yard site, the anniversary of a death.
I was going to share with you that I'm actually in the last week of saying Kaddish for my beloved mom.
And what was her name?
Her name was Leah Ezra,
Leah.
although we just called her Bobby. And one of the greatest things about Bobby, there were many, many great things about Bobby. But Bobby would watch on Zoom. She lived in Sacramento every week. And then she'd call in the afternoon and say, "You were brilliant." And so those of you who have taken on that Bobby behavior and said to me after a talk or a sermon, "That was brilliant," in memory of my mother, I've very appreciated it. This year of St. Kaddish has been transforming for me. I do want to ask, while screens are on, I so appreciate seeing people's faces. Is there anyone else who's saying Kaddish? Okay. So what I'll do is we'll actually thank you for those of you turning your cameras on. It's cacophonous to have unmute while one person is saying a prayer, and that's okay, because I want to hear your amens, and it'll throw me off just a teeny bit, and that's okay too. And it's actually traditional that anyone who has studied says Kaddish de Rabbanan. And so you're welcome to join in too. Rabbi Brous, thank you so much. What a kind of a magical morning this has been. And I know that there's going to be more thoughts and responses. And I also know that if I send you a few questions, you'll respond, and that the conversation will continue, because we felt that heart of true presence of you can tell when it's authentic and when it's real, and we felt that today in such a deep way. So what a great morning. What a great morning. Thank you to our Adult Learning Committee, who makes this a place of not just learning, but of learning with spirit. Batya wrote that our adult learning theme last year was resilience through Jewish joy. And we really tried to make that incredibly real at the shul in many, many ways. So if you're able to stand, angle up that camera, if you would, so we can see your faces. I'll recite the Kaddish de Rabbanan, and feel free to join in. Feel free to unmute so we can hear your amens. Harriet has also been saying Kaddish for Mary Lou Garfinkel, her brother's wife. There's a big paragraph in this that people might not know, and you'll just give a big amen at the end. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabba.
Amen.
Amen.
Be'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute. V'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru.
Amen.
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 Yehi
Yehi
shmei
shmei
Rabba
Rabba
Barach
Maya.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yitalal shemei dekudsha
Rihu.
le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'miran be'alma v'imru
Amen.
al Yisrael ve'al Rabbanan ve'al Talmidehom ve'al kol Talmidehom ve'al kol man de'askin ve'oraita div atra haden v'di v'chol atar ve'atar yehi lechon u'lechon shlam rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin u'mezona revicha u'furkana mikadam avuhom divishmaya v'imru amen.
Amen.
Yesh lamar rabba min shmaya v'chayim tovim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mrumav v'yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol Yoshvei Tevel v'imru amen.
Amen.
Okay.
May your mother's memory always be a blessing. And thank you all for this beautiful morning and beautiful conversation.
If
I
I,
hope I'll get to meet some of you in person sometime.
Rabbi, I
We're
just
all
want to
welcome
jump
to
in.
be part.
Rabbi, I just want to jump in and say a thank you, a big thank you, and Yishar Koach to Sharon Rubin, who all year long has chaired this ongoing read, just many discussion groups, much logistics, always with a smile and a lot of patience and love, and culminating in this wonderful morning. So thank you, Sharon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you to you, Rana, for all the adult learning work.
And thank you, Rabbi Brous.
Thank you all. Be well.